Hello Year 12 and welcome to Act 1 Scene 3. So we're going to pick up here. You'll notice there's a bunch of characters on the stage. We've got the King, the Queen, Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and a whole bunch of lords that are their attendants. So the King starts off by asking Rosencrantz and Guildenstern whether they've actually been able to find out anything about what Hamlet is actually up to. So why is it that he is mad? And you'll notice he actually says here, Claudius says here, get from him why he puts on this confusion. So Claudius is already quite suspicious that Hamlet is perhaps not being wholly truthful in his actions, and that this madness might in fact be a guise. So we can see Claudius is a pretty smart guy here. And then Rosencrantz says he admits he's distracted, but he won't say why. And Guildenstern says he uses his madness to be aloof. So we know that that's actually true. And the Queen asks, did he receive you well? Did he welcome you? And we have a contradiction here in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's account of how they were received. So Rosencrantz says, most like a gentleman, and Guildenstern says, but with much forcing of his disposition. So saying we really had to force him to have a chat with us. And Rosencrantz then goes, negative question, but of our demands most free in his reply. So they don't quite have their story straight, and perhaps this is showing that these two are quite nervous about having to give account to the King and Queen, considering that Hamlet has found out the King and Queen's plan, which they weren't supposed to reveal. And the Queen then says, did you to any pastime? So did you get him to agree to do something fun? And then Rosencrantz tells them about the play, and that the play is coming to the court, and that it'll be put on tonight. So this is only a day after the conversation with the players. And then Polonius says, "'Tis most true, and he beseeched me to entreat your majesties to hear and see the matter." So Polonius has said, oh yeah, and Hamlet has invited you guys to come as well. And the King is happy about this, and is happy about going to the play with Hamlet as well, which he won't be later. And Rosencrantz then says, we shall, my lord, so I shall deliver your message to Hamlet. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern exit, and then the King asks Gertrude to leave because they're going to get Hamlet to come here, and then they're going to basically actually do what Polonius has been plotting to do, so to get Hamlet and Ophelia to run into each other and figure out whether that is the cause of why he's been acting so strange. And the Queen agrees. She says, I will obey you. And then she actually does something that no one else has done throughout this entire play, and she wishes Ophelia well. She says, and for your part, Ophelia, I do wish that your good beauties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness. So shall I hope your virtues will bring to him his wonted way again, to both your honours. So she actually is kind of like, I hope that, he is just upset because he loves you and your affections have been withdrawn. And I hope that when he sees you again, that will bring him back to his normal self. So I don't think that she actually thinks that this madness is put on in the same way Claudius does. And then Ophelia obviously has a nice reply, and the Queen leaves. And then Polonius turns into bossy dad again, and he says, Ophelia, walk you here, Gracia, so please you, we will bestow ourselves. So he's saying we're going to go hide behind one of the tapestries. And then he gives Ophelia a book and tells Ophelia to read the book. And then he has this little comment down here, and pious action we do sugar over the devil himself. So he's basically saying we're going to trick the devil, being Hamlet at this point, by pretending that you're praying. And the King then has an aside here, and this is quite an important aside because it actually reveals that he is feeling quite guilty about the crime that he has committed. And he says, "Oh, 'tis too true." So he's saying that prayer captures out people who are feeling guilty. "Oh, 'tis too true, how smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience." So he's feeling guilty about what he's done. "The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is no more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to most painted word, oh heavy burden." So he's holding up under the weight of his deception and his crimes, but not necessarily very well. And then Polonius says, "Oh, I hear him coming, quick, let's hide." And Polonius and the king hide. Hamlet then enters with his most famous of soliloquies. So we have his first line, "To be or not to be," that is the question, and that obviously you will have heard before, it's quoted on everything. And then so that's basically saying whether to live or die, which is nobler. So he's actually contemplating his own suicide here, in my interpretation. And then he says, "Whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune." So he's saying, is it nobler to suffer under all of the hardships that fortune flings at us? So again, this is a contextual reference, the idea of fate being in control. Or take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. So he's saying, is it better to endure under all of these hardships that fate throws at us, or is it better to end them by ending ourselves? Okay, so he's still contemplating his own suicide, and then he's saying to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. And then he basically has this whole list of like bad things. So he's basically saying nothing can improve the condition of the world or its victims. Denmark will always be ruled by fate, and you can only improve the world by enduring the mine, or your alternative is to escape it. But then he goes on to say that that's not really an alternative, because people are afraid of what would happen if you do try to escape it. So he says, "But that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose born no natural return, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others we know not of." So he's saying, why would anyone want to endure the suffering that is life, other than the fact that they're scared about what could happen if they were to go against nature and go against God and commit suicide? So obviously, I think we've already mentioned at this time, suicide is considered against the sixth commandment, which is do not murder, because you would be murdering yourself, and so therefore that would incur damnation, because you would not be able to repent of that sin, because in killing yourself you cut yourself off from repentance. And then he goes on to say, "Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickled over with the pale cast of thought." So he's saying basically conscience and thoughts are what actually stops us from taking action, which is quite an insight into his character, because it is his constant questioning and his constant thoughts that really impedes his ability to take action a lot of the time. So just quickly before we finish this, I want you just to consider what his attitude was the last time we saw him. So last time we saw him, he'd come up with this plot about what he was going to do with Claudius and the play, and getting Claudius to reveal his own guilt. Now we've seen him again, and it seems he's had too much time to think of it, and now he's questioning whether it's even worth bothering to do it, or whether he should just end things here. And you'll notice that there's a contrast here from when he first finished talking to the ghost and he was talking about saving the world and fixing its brokenness. And now rather he's much more introverted. He has a much more pessimistic attitude, and this pessimistic attitude is what kind of colours his action for the rest of the play. And so we see he's distracted from his thoughts because Ophelia... Ophelia's there, we already know that, but he notices Ophelia. So he says, "Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph in thy orisons be all my sins remembered." So this is a little sarcastic side comment there. So he's basically being sarcastic. "Oh, she's at her prayers, but don't forget to pray for all those sins I've committed that forced you to reject me." And then Ophelia greets him, and Hamlet greets her back quite polite at this point. And Ophelia says, "My lord, I have remembered of yours that I have longed to re-deliver. I pray you now receive them." So she's giving back tokens of his love. And Hamlet says, "No, not I never gave you aught." So he's saying, "I didn't give you anything." So again, he's playing into the idea of madness here. And Ophelia says, "You know that you did, and you made me these basically beautiful love letters, beautiful poems sort of things." And she's saying, "Rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind, there my lord." Which is a little bit unfair considering she's also been basically shunning him. So she's saying, "I want to give your gifts back because they mean nothing to me now that there is no love in our relationship anymore." So she feels that he has rejected her, but she's not really taking any responsibility for her own part. And Hamlet responds quite aptly with, "Ha ha, are you honest?" And so this is a two-part question because he's actually asking, are you chaste? So honest. An honest woman is a chaste woman, but he's also asking, are you literally telling the truth? Obviously because of the offense that she's just kind of given him. And Ophelia goes, "What?" And then Hamlet says, "Are you fair?" And Ophelia goes, "What means your lordship?" So he seems to bounce from point to point. And then Hamlet says that if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty. And Ophelia says, "Could beauty, my lord, have better commerce than with honesty?" So surely those two characteristics should go together. And Hamlet says, "I truly, for the power of beauty will soon transform honesty from what it is to bawd, then the force of honesty can translate beauty into its likeness." So he's saying that if you let beauty rule you, then it's going to ruin your own honesty. And then he says, "This was sometime a paradox, but now it gives proof I did love you once." So he's saying, "I did love you." And then Ophelia says, "Indeed, my lord, you made me believe so." She's like, "I thought you loved me." And then Hamlet says, "You should not have believed me, for virtue cannot so inoculate our stock, but we shall relish it. I loved you not." So he then goes back on his word. So he's basically saying that, the virtues that we've had before, we can't go back and say that they exist now. And Ophelia says, "I was the more deceived." So she's saying, "Oh, okay, well, I must have mistaken what you said then." And Hamlet says, "Get thee to a nunnery, why wouldst thou breed of sinners?" So at this point, we've seen his pessimism, and basically he's saying you should go join a nunnery so that you don't breed any more human beings because human beings are really disgusting, which he goes on to talk about later in that little speech, "We are knaves, believe none of us." And Ophelia asks where Hamlet asks where Ophelia's father is, and Ophelia says, "At home, my lord." Hamlet then says, "Let the doors be shut upon him, that he may play the fool nowhere, but is in his own home." So he's saying, don't let your dad out to manipulate and deceive anyone, which is an example of dramatic irony because we know that it's actually Polonius who is manipulating this entire scene. Both his daughter and the whole conversation has been basically set up by him, and we know that he's also listening to this, so he's not at home at all. And then Ophelia says, "Oh, help him, you sweet." So she's thinking Hamlet is very mad at the moment. And then Hamlet decides to play up to that. And basically he's continues saying, "Get thee to a nunnery," or "Don't marry anyone. And if you do marry, don't marry anyone wise, but go to a nunnery and quickly to farewell." So we could actually interpret that, if you want to, that Hamlet is actually trying to look out for Ophelia, in that he's trying to get her out of the court where everything is bad, where there is secrecy, where there is jealousy, and where there is obviously betrayal as well. And then Ophelia goes, "Heavenly powers restore him." So she's exclaiming because she's worried about his sanity. And Hamlet then goes on this long rant, which is basically designed to make him seem mad to her. And again says, "To a nunnery go." So we have that repetition of that same phrase the whole time. And then Hamlet decides to exit, and Ophelia says, "Oh, what noble mind is here overthrown." So she's basically saying, "Oh no, he really truly is mad." And then she says, And I have ladies most dejected and wretched that sucked the honey of his music vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason like sweet bells jangled out of time. So she's saying, oh no, why did I buy into those love songs that he gave me? Clearly he's not in his right mind. And again, we have that idea of youth being rash and unreliable. So she said that unmatched form and stature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy, so that means blasted with madness. Oh, woe is me to have seen what I have seen, see what I see. So the rhyming couplet there shows Ophelia's true sanity in comparison with the rhythm of Hamlet's lines, which is all out of sorts. And then we see Ophelia leaves the spot there, and the king and Polonius reveal themselves. And the king says, oh, no, Polonius, I think your plot was wrong. He clearly doesn't love her just from what she said just then and what he said just then. But Claudius is quite quick on the uptake, because he has said, nor what he spake, though it lacked form a little, was not like madness. There's something in his soul of which this melancholy sits on brood, and I do doubt the hatch and disclose will be some danger. So he is well aware that Hamlet is feigning madness here, and he's also very suspicious about the cause of the feigned madness. So he's trying to understand what possible purpose Hamlet could have in feigning madness, and he says, I have in quick determination thus set it down. So he's worried that Hamlet knows about what he has done, and he has decided very quickly, because Claudius is a man of action, he's decided very quickly he needs to get Hamlet out of there, so he says he shall with speed to England. And he's basically coming up with a story then of why he can send Hamlet to England, rather than just saying, I'm exiling you because I think that you might know what I've done. So he's coming up with a story that he can tell Hamlet to make it sound genuine. And then Polonius, King Claudius asks Polonius, what do you think about that plot? And Polonius says, oh yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I still believe that the origin and commencement of his grief was from neglected love. So he's still harping on about his daughter and Hamlet being in love, and Hamlet being jaded because the relationship has ended. And Ophelia then comes back into the scene, and he says, how now, Ophelia, you need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said, we heard it all. So again, Polonius is once again dismissing Ophelia. So he's saying, you don't even need to tell me what happened because I saw it firsthand this time. And then he turns back to Claudius and says, if that's what you want to do, if you want to send Hamlet to England, then do what you like, but let's come up with one more plot before we go. So again, we have more spying and more deception here. So he says, let his queen mother all alone entreat him to show his grief. Let her be round with him, and I'll be placed, so please you, in the ear of all their conference. So again, Polonius likes hiding behind curtains, so he plans on concealing himself again so that he can listen to Hamlet's conversation with his mother. And basically he's saying if he won't tell his mother what's wrong, he's not going to tell anyone. And then if you can't find out through that conversation, then send him to England. And the king says, okay, that's a good idea. And then he has this little reference here, madness in great ones must not go unwatched. So he's saying that it's important that we keep an eye on this, because people who are important are mad are much more dangerous than those who are unimportant who suffer from madness. And that brings us to the end of Act 3, Scene 1.